Did any of the following actually happen as described in these scary stories? Welcome to our 2-hour Best of May Dogman special. I'm your old pal Bigfoot, shivering here in my basement hovel because this is the coldest Memorial Day I can ever remember, and I can remember a lot of Memorial Days. This episode is dedicated to Godzilla Tim Walker, one of our coolest executive producers. We'll also dedicate our first full-length episode of June to him, including a new Tim Walker rhyme, because Godzilla Tim's done more for us this past month than anyone could have ever expected, and we're extremely grateful. But right now, I want to dive straight into this first all-new story about a much warmer Memorial Day from some years back, and we'll call this allegedly true tale The Dogman of Bear Lake. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Back around 9 years ago, I was still a teenager living with my parents and my younger brother, who we can call Mikey. The four of us went to upstate New York to spend Memorial Day in a cabin my parents had rented. We joked all the way up about how we wanted to see a bear while we were there because it's called Bear Lake, but we ended up seeing something far less common and far more exciting. A North American upright walking canid, or dogman. This happened the night before we were going to leave for home, so most likely it was Sunday night. My brother and I were sitting outside the cabin. My father always went to sleep super early as he liked to get up before dawn and have private time for the rest of us. I remember he was already asleep inside, snoring. It was probably his snoring that caused me and Mikey to go sit outside in the first place. I think my mom was sitting up reading, which is what she used to do before she got her iPhone. Now she sits up getting brainwashed and hypnotized, but that's a different story. So my brother and I were sitting there, and we were just talking the way brothers do. Girls, sports, video games, maybe superheroes. We're still into girls and video games. Mikey kept cutting himself off in mid-sentence, and he would stare at the dark woods. He seemed to be getting fidgetier and fidgetier. His face started to look really scared, and eventually I just asked him what his problem was. Pointing to the woods, he said, "I think someone is watching us from over there." I turned and looked, and he nervously told me not to stare. He was afraid of angering whoever that was. I figured if someone was creeping around, they should know we didn't like it. So I took the opposite approach. I picked up a rock the size of a baseball with plenty of sharp edges, and I hurled it in the direction Mikey had pointed. Then I shouted, in my toughest wrestler voice that I could manage, "Hey you, we see you," and then I cursed him out using words I'll spare you from. Almost instantly there was a stirring of leaves and branches from that exact direction, and I realized my bluff was being called. I felt like peeing myself and running inside to Mommy, but I stood my ground and tried to continue looking tough. Something big and brown seemed to be emerging from that tree line. Mikey whispered, "It's the bear. It's the bear of Bear Lake," referring to how we had hoped so badly to see a bear while we were up there. I felt like running inside, and to be honest, I'm not sure why I didn't. I guess I was just too curious to look away. Plus, the trees were just far enough away that I figured I had time to get in the cabin before that bear could get close to us, even if it ran on all fours. This one seemed to be coming out of those trees standing up on its hind legs the way bears sometimes will do. But what crashed out of that tree line was no bear. Mikey and I have talked about this a million times since then, and we both agree 100% that this is what we saw on that night. A hairy, man-shaped figure, taller than my father, who was 6 feet when he used to stand up straight, walked out toward us on two weirdly shaped legs. It wasn't thick and baggy-skinned the way a bear is. It was far more like a canine, with pointed ears on top, not rounded ears like a bear has. Its snout appeared much darker than a bear's snout as well, and its teeth much larger. It was growling at us and baring those huge chompers. And to top it all off, its eyes reflected the light from inside our cabin and shone bright white in the night. It really looked like some kind of canine from hell. It truly appeared demonic. At the same time, it didn't look like a special effect in a movie. It looked like a real animal taking up physical space. The way it pushed the branches out of its way proved that it was no holographic projection. The way my brother and I both saw the same thing proved that it was no hallucination. The way its legs bent like a dog's hind legs proved that it was no furry in a costume. Mikey and I ran inside that cabin in the most manly way we could, which meant we dashed inside squealing like little children. Our mother tried to calm us down, but it was too late. We had awakened our father. He was never in a good mood when his sleep was interrupted, and he began making more noise than we were. When we told him we saw a werewolf outside, because we hadn't heard of the Dogman yet, he insisted we point him out. We all ran to the window and could not see him any longer. Against our protests, our father went out the front door and began shouting, "Werewolf! A werewolf! Won't you come out and play, yay?" He got no reaction, and he came back inside, slamming the door behind him loudly. Then we got lectured to stay in the cabin and to shut up so that he could sleep. Mikey and I stayed inside the rest of the night, muttering quietly to each other about what a jerk our father was and how we would never forgive him for not believing us. Eventually, we fell asleep, and we woke up to the smell of bacon as Dad was making breakfast. Our mom hated cooking, but Dad loved it, and whenever we ate together, it was around a meal he had prepared. Over breakfast, we could tell Dad was not acting normal. Eventually, he said that he had to apologize to me and Mikey. This was as big a shock as seeing the Dogman the night before had been. I don't think my father ever apologized for anything in his life before, but there he was, apologizing over the breakfast he had prepared. "I saw it," he stated, looking downward, unable to meet our eyes. "You saw the werewolf?" asked Mikey. "What the hell else do you think I'm talking about?" Dad bellowed. He was red-faced and clearly embarrassed to be admitting he was wrong, and also maybe he was ashamed to be admitting he was frightened. His entire worldview had been kicked to the curb, and it was clear he was thoroughly rattled. "When I got up this morning," he told us, the sun wasn't quite up yet. We knew better than to interrupt him with questions, and he went on. "I was sitting outside having a smoke," he continued, and Mom made a tisk-tisk sound. She didn't like Dad smoking, which is obviously why he enjoyed having private time. "Do you want to hear the story or don't you?" he asked loudly. At least this time he wasn't yelling at me or Mikey. "So I was having my moment of freedom from judgment," he went on, "and I was enjoying my smoke when I saw this big old dog walking from my left to my right, heading toward the tree line. He was down on all fours, not walking like the one you told me about," he said, looking up at me. "But that was the biggest canine that I've ever seen. It was like watching a pony trotting by. As it got toward the woods," he continued, "that damn thing stood up on its hind legs, and it snuck in between some trees just like that on its hind legs. The thing had to have been 8 or 9 feet tall when it stood like that, and..." His voice became quavery and trailed off. "And what?" asked Mom. Dad got up and left the table, locking himself in the bathroom and running the water loudly so we couldn't hear him anymore. He never did finish that sentence. The fun had been stripped from our holiday weekend, and we started driving home pretty soon after breakfast. It was a bad day, and it was a bad few weeks before we all started to feel normal again. Dad's confidence had been shot, and it damaged me and my brother as well. It was hard to see Dad broken up and broken down in that way, but it can be a traumatic thing to endure if you're unlucky enough to encounter the Dogman of Bear Lake. Dogman is a road hazard. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a Pennsylvania Dogman story for you that happened to me A few years back on Route 653, which is called Jim Mountain Road, locally over by Normalville. I was right near the place where the highway passes over Indian Creek over there, which might have something to do with what happened, but I'm not sure. It didn't happen on that overpass exactly, but I remember it being just past it. I had driven through Normalville, Pennsylvania, and was continuing eastward when everything suddenly got really strange. I felt it before I saw it. Something weird and bad was going on. The entire energy of the location changed. I know that sounds like I'm saying some kind of new agey thing, but I'm not a sensitive or a psychic or any of those kinds of things. I'm just an ordinary guy. Maybe I saw or heard or smelled something subliminally that my conscious mind didn't pick up on, and that's why I tensed up and felt a real and genuine kind of fear, as though I were driving into a nightmare. It was dark, and this all came upon me too quickly for me to be prepared in any sense. I've been looking at Google Maps and Street View, trying to remember exactly where it happened, but I can't say that for 100% certainty. I'm pretty sure it was after I passed Pritt's Road, but before I got to that house on the left over there. I'm saying that because there was no guardrail on the left side of the road. There couldn't have been. In my mind, it happened closer to the water, and I remember hearing the water when I rolled my window down. But if there had been a guardrail to my left, then the car I saw would have wrecked it when it drove off the road. I'm getting ahead of myself here in my attempt to be certain of the location. What I can say with certainty is that after I passed the overpass and the creek, I saw a car pulled off the road to my left. It was not parked in a neat manner nor a normal manner. The car was facing the same direction I was going, which means it had to have pulled off the road from my lane, swerving across potential oncoming traffic and winding up ditched at a 3/4 angle on the grass to the side of the 2-lane blacktop. Somebody pulling off the road for any normal reason would have pulled off to the right. I slowed my car down to a crawl, and I lowered my window to get a better look. The car doors were open in the front on both sides. I didn't see anybody in the car, and the lights were on in the interior, so I should have. "Hello?" I called out to see if anyone was alive and awake over there. I got no response, so I slowed the car down to a stop and reached for my phone to call the authorities and report what I was seeing. At that very instant, a loud barking erupted from the direction of the car, utterly surprising me and resulting in me accidentally flipping my phone into the back seat. I was about to turn around and reach for it when out of the woods, past the car, emerged a fast-moving animal heading directly toward me. I saw its white teeth, and I saw its bright eye shine, and I sensed its rapid movement toward where I was. I screamed. I stomped on the gas as this thing emerged onto the road right in front of me, right into my headlights. I'm going to try to explain fully what I saw, but even all this time later, I get kind of emotional talking about it. Possibly I may have some kind of post-traumatic thingy going on, but I can't afford the time or money to talk to a shrink about it. I'll be fine, but this is going to take some discipline and effort on my part. This was a brown, fur-covered animal, and it walked on its hind legs, but it was not a bear. It was too tall and too skinny to be a bear, which is not to say it was skinny. I just mean that the body shape was not bulky like an upright bear looks. This was far more like a canine man. In fact, that's how I described it to my father, who was the only one I shared this incident with back when it happened. He knows I've seen bears before, and I didn't get this shaken up when I did. I don't know if he believes that I saw what I think I saw, but I expect he accepts that it was something other than a bear. So I don't know if I was clear about this part. The big upright whatever it was started running directly at the driver's seat window, then shifted to his left so that he ran instead in front of my car. When I instinctively hit the gas to get away, I instead found myself speeding up right at the big man thing. I had a very clear view of it staring right at me, challenging me to ram directly into it. The thing had no fear at all of my car, although granted, I was not up to full speed by any stretch of the imagination. I was intensely focused on swerving the car to the right to avoid hitting the thing, but I'll tell you what I remember seeing in that brief moment. It had a man's body, but a dog's head. It was brown all over like a bear, though. I've never seen a wolf that color, but maybe they do come in that shade. I don't know. It was muscular in the way a man can be, but not in the way a bear is. Bears to me have very loose skin, but this thing had very little body fat and very clear muscle definition. Its chest was a man's chest. Its shoulders were those of a bodybuilder. It stood taller than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and it had its arms spread, covering my entire lane. I did not make note of its legs, as they were probably not in my field of vision at the time. The most upsetting part of this for me was that I could see this man had dog ears on top of his head. This was not a real man. It was some kind of monster standing and moving like a man. It was the spawn of hell, taunting humanity with its very existence. So I did make it to the side of the road, and I did avoid crashing into this man monster. But I was still moving the car at a very slow speed, and the muddy grass alongside the black tar was not helping me gain any traction. The beast man was on my door in seconds, trying to reach into any slight crack or opening to grab the door and pull it open. I had the door locked, but I had no faith at the time that this guy couldn't just rip it right off the car. It looked strong enough to pick me and the car up and throw us both, and I lost my mind with fear. I was screaming. I would have probably collapsed if I hadn't already been sitting down. I remember the creature realizing that it wasn't going to be able to get a good enough grip to rip my door open, so it began punching the glass just to the left of my head so it could break in that way. The second punch already put a big crack in my window, and I literally have blocked out whatever happened next. I don't remember anything between then and when I pulled into my driveway in New Centerville, which is about 15 miles away from there. Just like a UFO witness, I have missing time. Obviously, I got away, but I don't know how. My window was more smashed up than the last time I had looked at it. It had spiderweb cracks throughout. I must have gone on autopilot when that happened, as I remember nothing. I don't remember going out of my body or anything, but I don't think I was consciously there. Possibly, I was guided by some protective force, I just don't know. I take different routes now when traveling through that area, but I know that alone won't make me safe. I keep my eyes out for anything strange, and if I ever get that weird feeling that something's out of place again, I think I'll stomp on the gas and remove myself from the area. If I saw a car off the road again like I saw that night, I would speed out of there, get home, and then call the authorities once I was safe in my own house behind double and triple locked doors. I can help people more if I'm alive. That's my new philosophy. I don't like to drive at night anymore. I bet you can guess why. I have completely rearranged my work schedule in the years since then so that I can be home before dark whenever possible. Even during daylight hours, though, I never let down my guard. That's because I've been let in on a big secret that hardly anybody else knows. It's because I know that Dogman is a road hazard. Don't go anywhere. We've got another Dogman story coming up in a second, but first we have to thank today's executive producer, Julie Sadler. Julie Sadler, more badass than a big bad rattler. Sadler, Julie, cooler than lapis lazuli. Please join me in thanking Julie Sadler for making this episode possible. I have to put up with some of the creepiest liars, haters, and trolls on the planet, but Julie Sadler is one of the good ones, and she makes it seem worthwhile. In return, we share with her our secret Sunday episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel. And if you're a nice person, then you're invited to join our club too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or do what Julie Sadler did and click the join link below this and each of our videos. Now let's cut to that second Dogman story of the day, and we call this one Dogman Raised Me from My Sick Bed. Dear Scary Stories NYC, greetings from the wilds of northern Michigan. I have a Dogman story to share with you and your audience that took place back in the first year when my wife and I moved to the house that we still live in. In fact, this story is the reason that we actually tried to sell this place and move out less than 6 months from the time we moved in. This was the only time I got so scared that I relieved myself on the spot. I think that part of me thought I had reached the end of the line and that I was about to meet my maker. If I could only explain how horrific and smelly this Dogman was, then you would understand why my reaction was so extreme. The story happened sometime between March and May. I don't remember exactly when, but this would have been back 16 years ago. I tend to get sick a lot at this time of year because of the weather changes. It's warm one day, cold the next, or warm in the morning and cold in the afternoon. Sunny at noon, but rainy by 2 p.m. You know what I'm talking about. The past 2 years, I've been sick even more because I haven't gotten to go outside and see the sun or do my normal physical activities as much. It's been especially awful for me, even though I know I have no right to complain. At least my maladies have been colds and fevers, but nothing that didn't take care of itself and dissipate after a few days. Those kinds of minor illnesses are a joke compared to what some people have been having to deal with. Yet at the same time, they can really grind your week to a halt and mess up your life in a number of annoying ways. This story happened when I was suffering through one of these kinds of flus that I seem to specialize in, and I was in bed, miserable, achy, and losing money at a rapid pace. You see, if I don't work, I don't make money. And if I don't make money, then my wife has to pay my expenses. And if my wife has to pay my expenses, her mother comes over and speaks loudly about the other, richer men that she had advised Laura, not her real name, to marry. It's not too late, Laura, she'll sometimes say. I know a good divorce lawyer. Ah, family. Nothing in the world is quite like in-laws. So although my wife is a saint, we were both getting on each other's nerves as my cold stretched on day after endless day. This story happened one night when she was forced to take out the garbage, the one household chore she really hates to do. As I said, this was garbage night, when we had to carry our cans from behind the house where we kept them out to the curb so that they could be emptied loudly into the garbage truck when it came right at dawn the next morning. Laura was especially unhappy with this situation, and she kept asking me over and over again if I wasn't feeling well enough to handle this job for her. It reached the point where the sun was down, and it was getting pretty dark out there, but she still hadn't brought out the garbage from the house, and she still hadn't moved the cans from the back to the front. I felt bad. It was a tedious, smelly, nasty job, and it involved lifting and carrying heavy things. I knew that was my job as a husband, and I was as unhappy with the situation as she was. When she finally decided to do the job, I could hear her fussing around, slamming drawers and cabinets in the kitchen. Finally, she appeared at my bedside, angrily asking me where the ties were for the large garbage bags. I told her the ties were in the cardboard box with the bags, and she insisted they were not. She stormed back into the kitchen, calling me a moron and an idiot, and then I heard the sound of her tying the bag up. I asked her where the ties were, and boy, was that a mistake. They're exactly where you said they would be, she shouted out furiously. Are you happy? She demanded. Are you glad that you proved me wrong again? Do you want a little star on your forehead now? Like I said, our nerves were frayed, and we were both in terrible moods. So she left the house, grumbling rude things about me under her breath, and trust me, I was saying equally unpleasant things about her, just quiet enough that I hoped she couldn't hear me. She slammed the door as she went outside, and I heard her walking back toward the cans. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Trudge, trudge, trudge. Suddenly, there was a blood-curdling scream. I knew it was my wife. I've never heard her scream like that before, but it was unmistakably her. My heart beat out of my chest, and I popped out of bed immediately, making myself dizzy from the sudden movement. My legs were more tangled in the blanket than I had realized, and I took a header, face first, right onto our beautiful hardwood floor. This did not help my body pain, nor did it soothe my bad mood. Laura came running back into the house, still carrying the garbage bag with her. She slammed the door, and she locked it. I would have asked her what was going on, but my face was still recovering from my recent fall. It didn't matter. She was about to spill it all out in an expletive-laden, screeching rant. The short and rated PG version is that she saw what she described as a dogman out by the garbage. Now, I should back up and make note that I have always been a fan of cryptids in general, but the Michigan dogman in particular. I grew up here, and it's a part of our culture locally. I won't say I believed in the creature, but I will admit that I really hoped it was real. I definitely wanted to believe in it, and I sincerely hoped that if it were real, that I would get to see it someday. My wife, on the other hand, spent her childhood in Colorado and only moved to Michigan with her mom after her parents divorced. She hadn't even heard of the dogman the first time I told her about it, and she never seemed to take me very seriously about that subject. She didn't believe in or even entertain the notion of cryptids being something that was legitimate as far as I knew. So, when she literally brought the garbage back into the house while blaming the dogman, I flew into a rage. She was making fun of me. She was trolling me. And she was doing it to get me to take out the garbage when I was feeling really sick. I extricated myself from that blanket clumsily, and holding onto the walls to keep from feeling too dizzy, I tore into her verbally. The two of us got in each other's faces, screaming at the top of our lungs, each accusing the other of the worst things we could think of to say in that moment. Barefoot, and in my pajamas, I grabbed the garbage bag and stormed out into the cold night. Before heading to the back to get the cans, I walked to the curb, tossing the big garbage can in the direction of our garbage pickup spot. The effort almost made me faint again, but it felt good to haul something big and heavy and get out some of my frustration. Then, I stormed to the back of the house, holding onto the wall every time I felt the world spinning. My feet were freezing, and I wanted to get this over quickly if I could. I felt like shouting at her about how she was going to make me sicker by forcing me to do this, but I was having a hard time breathing in enough oxygen to continue walking. There wasn't enough extra breath left to waste on screaming or even talking, and by then I was beginning to smell the awful smell of the garbage, much smellier than usual. I turned the corner to head to the area we stashed the cans in, and I gasped in shock when I realized there was an extremely tall man standing there in the shadows. It took me a second to see that my wife hadn't lied at all. She hadn't been mocking my interest in cryptids. She had actually seen a dogman. I saw him too, and he looked up from sorting through our garbage to see me seeing him. Have you ever looked at an American football player? They're sometimes just as tall as basketball players, but twice as wide. Well, this gray-haired monster made football players look small. It had muscles on its muscles. It stood like a man. It had pointed upright ears on top of its head. It had claws on the ends of its very human-like fingers that seemed like they could cut through concrete. Its legs bent backwards like the legs of the devil. This was an upright, walking wolf. I had expected the dogman to be down on all fours, but otherwise, this was the giant man-like cryptid that I had foolishly wished to be able to see with my own two eyes. Be careful what you wish for, dear viewer. When he made eye contact, his eye shine was so bright it nearly blinded me. I evacuated on the spot, and then I evacuated myself from the spot doing a faster version of the Jerry Nadler shuffle, if you know what I mean. From somewhere, the power to scream returned to me, and I ran back to the front door, squealing like a stuck pig. I tell you, my feet felt no cold, and all my muscle aches were gone as I moved my earthly remains back to the front door, unsure if the dogman was chasing me or not. My wife, who I mentioned earlier is a saint, was waiting by the open front door, eagerly waving me in. When I tripped and fell into the foyer, she slammed the door behind me, locking all the locks on it. "I told you there was a dogman out there," she shouted. "Why would you go out there when you knew there was a dogman?" So, I set the alarm to get up before the garbage men arrived in the morning, but I never heard it go off. My wife ended up having to move the cans herself in the morning, but she didn't complain to me about it. Instead, she made an appointment to see our doctor that afternoon. I had caused all that fuss, and she was more concerned with me than she was with our argument. That's how you know you married the right person when situations like this arise. So, we made motions to move out of there, and for obvious reasons. Our property was not worth as much as we paid for it, or so it seemed. We could have sold it, but only if we took a really big loss. The dogman didn't come back, as far as we know, although it might be because of the garbage shed I hired some men to build. Without direct access to our garbage, the dogman seems to have found some other part of Michigan to haunt. Without any repeat visits, we slowly calmed down and got used to where we were. In all these years since, we've been happy here, and our daughter will be graduating into high school next year, assuming school gets back to normal soon enough. It's our home, and we love it, but we almost left here long ago because Dogman raised me from my sick bed. I'm allergic to Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, from the time my family moved to rural Pennsylvania when I was 15 to my 30th birthday, I was severely allergic to the Dogman. What happened on my 30th birthday? Well, that was the day when a relative bought me 6 brand new, state-of-the-art, motion-activated trail cameras. I remember at the time she told me that the only sure way to get rid of Dogman is to put up motion-activated cameras. It also works for Bigfoot, she told me. Any cryptid worth its salt disappears instantly when confronted with a deep-focus video or still camera. We all laughed at the time. I didn't know if she was being serious or not. The thing is, once we put the cameras up around our property, my allergies went away. Let me go back and explain how bad it was here before the cameras, and maybe then you'll understand what I'm talking about better. When I say I was allergic to the Dogman, what do I mean by that? How would I know Dogman was the cause of my allergies? And what do I mean by allergies in this context? Those are all good questions, so let me answer them, one at a time. When I say I was allergic, I mean I would launch into a sneezing fit suddenly and without warning. It could be quiet in a room and suddenly I was loudly sneezing, and people would all leap in the air. It wasn't like a normal kind of sneezing that you could feel coming on. There was no warning to me or anyone around me. I would find myself sneezing violently, loudly, explosively, and then I would run out of the room to find a bathroom or at least a box of tissues. Even after getting myself away from others, the sneezing would continue for another long while. It was hard to gasp for air in between each sneeze, and sometimes I would swallow down the wrong pipe and choke myself, leading to a coughing jag in between the sneezes. There were times when I nearly didn't survive until the sneezing stopped, and then I would feel miserable for the rest of the day. Body aches, headaches, soreness, and exhaustion. That is what I mean when I say I had an allergy. Now, the reason I say it was an allergy to Dogman might take a little longer to fully explain. The first time this happened, I was visiting my grandma who lives almost inside the woods at the end of a block where her house was the only house from the 1920s through the late 1960s. Her house is set much further back from the road even now. You can tell it was built much earlier than the others over there. And while the other properties may have 2 or 3 trees in their front or backyards, Grandma's house is partially hidden from the road by trees, and the back half of it is under tree cover. This is a pretty old forest, and these are very old and tall trees. So I was at Grandma's when I was a teenager during a warm late summer or early autumn day, and I had my first of these violent sneezing attacks. I grabbed some napkins and ran out onto Grandma's back porch, sneezing into them like I had lost all control. In between sneezes, I saw a tall, hairy, Batman-looking guy standing in the trees, watching me as he walked from my right to my left. When he was gone from sight, I slowly stopped sneezing as much, and then it was over. When I say he looked like Batman, what I mean is his eyes glowed like they did in that old Batman animated TV series. He had tall ears up on top of his head, and his eyes glowed. But if that was a guy in a costume, it was a camera-ready costume because he looked like some kind of an animal or manimal. Even in the darkness under the trees and even at that distance, I could see that he was covered in fur, like a mammal or a marsupial. I told Grandma about what happened when I went inside, and she seemed not to be very surprised. She had lived there her entire life, and she told me that my family and I were going to have to get used to those upright wolves, and that they had always been in the area, same as the Bigfoot. I pressed her for more information, and she told me that she never had seen any of these things for herself. She was quite used to hearing the stories from other people, though. She told me the names of 4 or 5 people that she had known who had given her stories of big, hairy, cryptid men in the surrounding hills. Some of them were like gorillas, and some were like wolves. But in both cases, they sometimes would stray down into human habitations and cause trouble. The dog-headed men come every autumn, she told me. I didn't want to talk about this to my parents, who were both basically yuppies at that point. They would give me crap if I brought up a subject like cryptids to them, and I didn't need any more grief or any more criticism at that stage of the game. Nevertheless, it soon became apparent that the dogman was not content to merely walk around on Grandma's side of town. My father had been friends with the family that had lived in our house before us. When they moved out west, they cut him a special deal for the place so that they could come and visit it when they wanted to. They had and have very deep emotional ties to that land. While the house is not large, the grounds are fairly big and connect to the same woods that Grandma lives on the edge of on the other side of the village. There's even a pond in the back section of the grounds, which is cut off from our backyard proper by a couple rows of trees. It's like having a public backyard and then a private one in the rear, surrounded by trees and wildlife. The rest of the family finds that back area relaxing to hang out in, on a chaise lounge or on a picnic blanket, but I was constantly on edge when I would be back there. I've never gone into that area where I didn't feel the vibe that someone was watching me. I would go there with one of my girlfriends because she liked it so much, but sure enough, one time I had one of my sneezing attacks back there. I carried those travel-sized tissue packs with me, 2 or 3 at a time, not just one. While I sneezed and coughed and blew my nose, my poor girlfriend sat there, bored. When she suddenly screamed, I got scared that I had accidentally sneezed on her. As it turned out, she had an even better reason than that to be upset. You guessed it, there was a dogman standing right there, just like 50 feet away, staring at me with an unhappy expression on his face. I think he found my sneezing as annoying as everyone else seemed to feel about it. So now my girlfriend and I were running back to the house, and I was still sneezing uncontrollably. I forget if I mentioned this before or not, but this would happen in the autumn, not the spring, not the summer. Usually it would begin to cool off in September, and that's when my allergies would begin. I felt then, and still feel now, that my grandmother was right in the first place. The dogman migrates through that area in autumn. I don't know where it's migrating from or migrating to, but that's when it does it. The earliest I've had attacks has been late August, and the latest in the year it's happened has been I think the last week of November, or else the first week in December. It's gone before Christmas, and it's back around Labor Day, more or less. That's what I call dogman season in our town. My parents wanted to buy me a condo in a local large city when I finished college in my mid-20s. I felt lucky, and I felt honored, but I really didn't want to move into the city. I was finding enough work where we lived out in the country to sustain myself. I'm just not as ambitious as my parents, and not that enamored of city life. We realized in the middle of the process that it was my parents' dream to live in the city, not mine. Many older people dream about retiring to the country, but my parents dreamed of comfort and convenience instead. So they ended up moving to the condo that they had bought for me, and they gave me the house instead. I was never so happy the summer that happened, and never so regretful as when autumn arrived, and so did my dogman allergy. With dogman comes buyer's remorse. That's a truth worthy of embroidering and framing, believe me. And so, my life with my allergy continued on unabated for a few more years. Most of the time I would not even see the dogman, but I knew when he was there. I didn't need to prove it to myself over and over again. I already knew what I knew. The thing is, not all my friends and relatives had seen the dogman for themselves, so they started to think I was kinda nutty. I'd burst into a sneezing fit and then blame it on the dogman, and they would laugh. Soon, it became a running joke. Or maybe I was the running joke. I did see the dogman one other time during a sneezing fit that I can remember, and I had a witness that time too. I was hanging out in the backyard one warm autumn night with my buddy, who we can call Ned. I had one of my attacks, and Ned immediately stood up and started looking around. He had seen my attacks before, but always inside the house. This time, he wanted to see for himself if the dogman I always talked about was actually real. And it was. I only caught a side glance of that thing that time, but I know I saw it because it was a different color brown than any vegetation around there on that day, and it wasn't there the next time I looked in that location. Ned, on the other hand, got a much better look, and he told me that it was larger than a man, but it walked like a human. More importantly, he told me it was covered in brown fur, just as I had seen. According to Ned, it had a head like a dark brown German shepherd, but a different kind of brown than he had ever seen on that kind of a dog. The fur was also longer than a German shepherd's fur gets to be, and it appeared somewhat shaggy. It walked around the underbrush, staring at me as it did so, at least according to Ned. He demanded we go inside immediately, and he never kidded me about my allergy ever again. And so we come full circle to my 30th birthday. Once those cameras were up all around the house, my allergy went away. I bet I would still get it if I went over on Grandma's property, but the family sold that after she passed on, so I just don't know. Just a couple of weeks ago, I started sneezing and feeling like I had a bad cold, and I worried it might be something really wrong with me. I went to see a doctor who told me that I had developed a seasonal allergy to pollen. So now I sneeze in the spring, not the autumn. It's not nearly as severe an allergy as my old one, and my wife says it's the first time I've ever done anything in my life the normal way. I guess that's true. I may try doing some other things in the normal way every now and then, because it's a lot less upsetting than knowing that I'm allergic to Dogman. Don't go anywhere. We've got another Dogman story to go. But first, a rhyme for today's executive producer, Nicole Gomez. Heart is where the home is. She's got a lot of soul, Ms. Gomez, Nicole. Please join us in thanking Nicole Gomez for making this episode possible. In exchange, we share with her our weekly Sunday night uncensored Dogman stories far too wild to ever run on this channel. Not to mention our over 15 hours of archived uncensored stories. You too can become a Scary Stories executive producer by joining our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or by doing what Nicole Gomez did and clicking the join link under this or any of our videos. And now, on to our second Dogman story of the day, which we call The Dogman in the Suburbs. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I took a part-time job when I was younger that somehow led to me getting confronted by a dogman out in a very unlikely place, suburbia, USA. When I was in college, I would pick up extra money by riding shotgun with my buddy, whose parents had this weird side business. Somehow, when people's luggage would end up at the wrong airport, his parents would send my friend and me, or one of their other drivers, to pick it up and deliver it to the passengers' homes. We would start off at the airport, picking up specific bags that we had paperwork for, and then, one by one, we'd drive them out to all the different places these people lived in to return their property to them. I would do it 1 or 2 times a week, depending on how much time I could afford to spend on it, and still get my schoolwork done. It meant a bit of lifting and carrying, and a lot of trying to stay alert and awake and manning the maps. I would plan out our route beforehand, trying to cut the traveling time down by planning the shortest and most logical route to get all the bags delivered in one night. Sometimes we get lucky, and the addresses would line up all in a row, but other times there would be a great deal of distance between the stops, and we'd be out all night, not getting home until dawn or later. The night on which we had to deal with the Dogman was probably our least lucky night, and it started off bad. Our second or third location wasn't where I thought it would be, and we decided that rather than waste time trying to locate it, we would bump it to the final delivery and try to find it on the way back. There were plenty of other hassles all night long, and we didn't get back to where we started off until something like 4 in the morning. I forget where I thought we were supposed to deliver it to, but a payphone call waking up my buddy's parents confirmed that the bag was supposed to go to an address on Westview Terrace in Womelsdorf, Pennsylvania. Now, this was back in the day before cell phones, and this was back in the day before GPS. I searched and searched in my map book of Pennsylvania, and yes, I do mean a book of paper maps, and I could find no Westview Terrace in Womelsdorf. His parents gave us directions over the phone, but they only led us in circles, and trust me, the two of us were in increasingly cranky moods. Finally, we stopped in an all-night gas station and asked the guy there how to get to Westview Terrace. He told us that it was a relatively new area and gave us directions that were different from the ones we had gotten from my driver's parents. Following along the way the gas station guy told us to drive led us to this little community of cul-de-sacs that for some reason was entirely missing from the maps we were carrying. I guess my maps were too old to have these streets because it looked like there should only be trees or grass there on the thing I was reading. I felt frustrated, but at least we had finally located the place, probably about 20 minutes before dawn. People were never happy to be awakened in the middle of the night when we arrived, but they most hated when we would interrupt them a half hour before they were going to get up anyway. Nobody ever gave us too much guff about it because they were usually too relieved to get their stuff back, but I really disliked the just before dawn deliveries most of all. So, Westview was built right along the edge of whatever woods remained over there. It looked like everyone had the woods as their own backyard. We went down the block slowly until we found the address, where the driver put on the brakes and sat there idling the engine. He turned and looked at me with that "you bring them the bags" look. As I said, I least liked the pre-dawn deliveries, so I sighed heavily and tried to think of an excuse why my driver friend should take the bags in instead. Suddenly, my friend was looking past me with a lot of surprise. His tired eyes opened up really wide. I looked to where he was looking, and I saw the single most incredible thing I've ever had to look at in my life. Even to this day, that takes the cake of the most shocking thing ever. There was a big dog, and I mean big, like 8-9 feet tall, walking on his hind legs toward us. It was walking on some grass between two houses from the back by the woods, and it was looking right at us. It was colored gray like a wolf, and in fact, it resembled a wolf in a few ways, except that it was walking upright, like a man. Well, to be honest, it wasn't exactly like a man, but it was bipedal. It had big paws on both its arms and its legs, and it held its front paws out in front of it like a monster in a movie. I could see long dog claws or nails, and they were completely prehistoric looking. This was like a creature you'd see in an old caveman movie, but it was very real, and it was right there. It stopped on the grass at the edge of the sidewalk and just stared at us. I said to my buddy he should beep the horn. He asked me if I was crazy and that it would wake up the entire neighborhood. I said, so what? And I asked him when we would ever see any of these people again for the rest of our lives. He didn't know how to answer that. I tried a different approach. I asked him if he would like to have a rest of his life to live. He seemed to get my point, but was still too afraid to beep the horn. I told him I was not going out there until that dogman had left the scene, and I leaned over and I beeped the horn myself. And then I beeped it again and again. A neighbor on the right of the dogman came outside to see what the problem was. He shouted at us and pointed a weapon in our direction when the dogman turned and looked at that guy instead of us. His eyes got so wide, it was like he was a cartoon character, and then he just went right back inside his house. I beeped the horn some more, trying to wake up the entire neighborhood, and succeeding in getting a whole lot of people very unhappy. As they came out in 2s and 3s, the dogman clearly grew uncomfortable. He was fine pushing around 1 or 2 neighbors at a time, but he was beginning to feel outnumbered, and so he turned and walked back down the grassy alley toward the woods that he no doubt had emerged from in the first place. Realizing it was my moment, I grabbed the luggage and ran to the front door, ringing the doorbell wildly. This family were the deepest sleepers on the block. I got this groggy dude to sign for his luggage, and then I leaped and sprinted back to the van. We went back on the highway, and my driver friend wanted to stop for some coffee. The weird experience we had just lived through had drained him, and he needed some caffeine to make sure we made it all the way home. He asked me if I wanted any, and I just laughed. My heart was still beating so hard from our close encounter with that prehistoric-looking dinosaur dog that I knew it was going to be hours before I would be able to sleep. Every time I think back on it, the memories make my heart beat in panic, even to this very day. I've never had another cryptid experience, and I hope I never do. I feel lucky that I even lived after my buddy and I saw and beeped at the dogman in the suburbs. Dogman squatting in our attic. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My parents are both complete idiots, and so is my younger brother. I keep praying that they will tell me that I'm adopted, but they refuse to admit it. If you think I'm just behaving like an ungrateful brat, I'll tell you a story to prove my point. I'll tell you a story about how they reacted when my girlfriend and I discovered that we had Dogman squatting in our attic. I grew up in a nice large apartment in a working class part of town. My father got involved in shady dealings with some very bad people, and suddenly he had the money to move us out into a fancy rich neighborhood on the border between suburbia and the country in the state of Pennsylvania. It was a terrible place for me to live, as it was a 40-minute walk for me to get to the train to bring me back to the city where I was still taking classes and where my girlfriend lived. I found I was staying in town with her more and more, partially because the trains back to nowhere don't run all that late, and partially because I'm taking on any paying gig I can find. I desperately want to find a place in town with my girlfriend, and I'm trying to earn and save as much money as I can, as quickly as I can. The train back to Dogman Land is expensive, and I'm not going to ask my parents for financial help. They don't even want me to go into the city or to college. If I hadn't gotten a complete scholarship, I would never have enrolled or met my girlfriend. She's very important to me because she's really the first intelligent person I've managed to stay friends with. She proves my parents were wrong when they said I was too stupid to have smart friends. She makes me feel so hopeful for the future, and then when I go home, my parents erase all of that and leave me feeling like walking off a bridge. Then, they have the nerve to say my girlfriend is bad for me. It all came to a head with the Dogman incident, after which my girlfriend and I both realized the depth of my family's idiocy. You know how intelligent people are always so aware of their own limits and stupidity, but dumb people have the utmost confidence that they are never wrong. Well, my parents, they're never wrong. Except they're always wrong. So, I had been telling my girlfriend, let's call her Franny, which is not her real name, about my great-grandfather who was a boxer before I think they even called them boxers. I think he was a pugilist or something like that. I saw a signed photograph of him posing with his fists up in the attic, and I wanted to hang it somewhere downstairs. My mother wouldn't let me, as she had some kind of problem with that side of the family and forbade me to take it out of the attic. In reality, I just don't think she wanted to admit that anyone in our family was ever successful through honest hard labor instead of criminal activity. So, when I brought Franny home that day, she asked for me to take her up to the attic to show her my great-grandfather, the pugilist. She already knew that none of my living relatives were worth spending time with. To get into the attic, you have to tug on this chain that hangs from the ceiling, and it slides open, revealing a staircase that you can pull down and then climb up. As we hoisted ourselves up there, we both heard a skittering sound coming from behind us and to the right. If I had known there would be any danger, I would have gone first, but Franny was in front. When we both heard that sound and Franny gasped, I felt a protective urge and climbed up around her to get myself between her and whatever or whomever might be up there. I first envisioned rats, due to the sound of nails running on the wooden floor, and so I scanned the floor of the attic with my eyes, looking out for one or more of those creepy little disease-carrying monsters. Well, there was a monster up there, but it was not a rat. I saw its feet first, which were like dog feet, gray dog feet. My mind spun in warped circles as my eyes moved upward, revealing the torso and arms of a dog, but a dog doing some kind of stupid pet trick where he was standing on his hind legs. When I reached the head of this remarkably tall beast, it barked at me and at Franny, who had climbed part of the way out onto the landing. We need to go, I said impatiently to my girlfriend, who was blocking my only means of escape from our old attic. I couldn't get out without stepping on her head, so I had no choice but to wait until she climbed back down the stairs. She probably jumped down fast, but to me, locked in uncomfortable eye contact with some kind of werewolf being, it felt like she would never get back down the ladder. I couldn't slam that ladder back into position and lock the door up fast enough, and my hands were shaking violently. Franny was shivering all over, and I gave her a warm hug. I remember telling her that everything was all right, but I did not believe my own words. Soon, my idiot father and moron younger brother were there, asking us what was going on. I tried to say nothing was wrong, that we had just changed our minds, but before I could get that out, Franny innocently blurted out that a dogman had broken into our attic. In my house, it's a bad idea to share information like that with anyone, because they will invariably take a dangerous situation and make it worse. My brother said he wanted to see the monster too, and I told him no. I lost my temper and said it was a freaking werewolf. It was too dangerous to go back up there, and we had to call animal control. My father, whose favorite son is his youngest, objected to my telling his most magnificent offspring no. Not just telling him not to go in the attic, but he felt my brother should never be told no, period. So he launched into one of his, "Why should you get to see the dogman and not your brother?" type of rants. Honestly, in that moment, I felt like sending them both up there and locking the door, but I took a deep breath and I realized that it was up to me to try to prevent them from hurting themselves, or worse. "Please," I asked my father, "please don't open the door to the attic which has a man-eating monster inside it. Please, please don't do that. It might come down here, and we would all get torn to ribbons and digested slowly." He started making ad hominem attacks on both me and Franny, and it was appalling. Once you resort to insults to defend your position, you're admitting that you know you're wrong. There was also zero reason to include insults directed toward my girlfriend in his baseless attacks on me, and it was all I could do to retain any sense of decorum or any shred of empathy for my family. I turned to Franny and suggested she grab her stuff so that we could leave. We still had time to get back to the city and stay at her place. My alleged father began shouting loudly at both of us, all sorts of insults, each of which contradicted the previous one. "We're elitist intellectuals," he shouted. Then, "We're super dumb imbeciles" next. Any insults he could think of were tossed haphazardly around the room as a sort of experiment to see what would stick. When he ran out of nonsense to scream, my brother reminded him that he wanted to go upstairs to see the dogman. They were acting like we had found a painting by Leonardo up there, not a savage man-eating dog-headed manimal. When my father grabbed the chain and pulled, Franny screamed, and we both ran for the front of the house. As I slammed the door behind us, I heard my little brother let out the most blood-curdling scream I'd ever heard in my life. It was so unnerving that my knees buckled, and I almost slid down the front steps to the sidewalk. Both Franny and I found ourselves standing in the middle of the street, as though the sidewalk itself might bite us. I said we should call animal control, but Franny pointed out that it might make more sense to call the police. That's what I did. I called the cops, but once the dispatcher came on the line, I started stuttering and I couldn't form a complete sentence. Franny grabbed the phone from me and hurriedly said that a burglar had broken into our attic and was coming downstairs to attack the rest of the family. She gave the address and was told that someone was on the way. The dispatcher asked her to stay on the line, but we had a train to catch, so she disconnected the call, then turned my phone off so that we wouldn't have to deal with her calling us back before we got on the train. The idea of being trapped in that town for the night was unacceptable, since the only place we had to sleep out there was my family's house, the one that my father had released a really tall, dog-headed, feral man into. Once we were safely on the train and heading back to sanity, I risked calling the house to find out what had happened. My father was furious at me for calling the police. He told me that I had to ask permission first before calling the cops. I was like, "Yeah, whatever, dude. Are your son and wife still alive? How much damage happened?" So it took a long, boring time to get information out of him while he was trying to blame me for his own stupidity. But eventually what I learned was this. The dogman had come to the staircase door and tried to come down through it, but my brother kept using a broom to scat it away. Eventually, my father was able to get the door shut again, and the dogman flipped out. banging on the door to try to open it up again. Each time he banged, it came a little more open, and it wasn't gonna hold for very much longer. When the Popo arrived, they went up to the attic and found a big mess and several areas in which the burglar, had marked the attic as his turf. But they didn't see the dogman itself. They advised my father to patch the hole that the prowler had created to get in, and I sure hope he did. I haven't been back up to that attic since, so I really don't know. Maybe Dad left the hole open for the dogman to come back so that my spoiled brother could get a better look. I knew I needed to move out of there even before this incident happened, but I'm absolutely desperate to move since the day that I discovered Dogman squatting in our attic. Don't go anywhere, we've got another Dogman story in a second. But first, I'd like to give a shout out to today's executive producer, Joseph Morrison. Joseph, he's quite explosive. Joseph Morrison, he likes Dogman lore, son. Please join me in thanking our newest executive producer, Joseph Morrison, for making this episode possible. In return, we share with him links to see each of our all-new secret Dogman stories, far too wild to tell on this channel. We'd like to share them with you too. All you need to do is join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or do what Joseph did and click the join link below any of our videos to become a channel member. If you do become a channel member, you can do it for as little as 99 cents a month, although if you join at $10 a month, then you get to see our 15 hours of archived, scary, uncensored Dogman stories, plus get to watch our videos when I upload them, which is usually before the general public gets to watch. We really do need all our executive producers, as it's getting harder and harder to continue doing this show. And, speaking of the show, it's time we got on with it. So here's our second Dogman story of the day, which we call Dogman at the End of the Rainbow. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was a kid, I was told that at the end of every rainbow, there's a pot of gold belonging to a leprechaun. I forget where I heard it. Maybe it was on a cereal commercial. So, one rainy day when my best friend Nino was over playing, the rain stopped and a giant, beautiful rainbow appeared out the window. I asked my mother if I could go outside and play, and she said, "Oh, please do." So we ran out back to stare at the rainbow. I reminded Nino about the pot of gold, and he said if we had a pot of gold, we could get our own house and not have to listen to our parents anymore. That was all the inspiration I needed, and we raced off into the forest behind our backyard, certain that the end of the rainbow was in that general direction. Well, we marched and marched under the heavy tree cover, and it got harder and harder to look up and see the rainbow any longer. I'm pretty sure it wasn't even there anymore, since they usually only last like 10 minutes. I didn't know that as a kid though, and neither did Nino, so we picked a tree that looked climbable and proceeded to ascend upward to look for the rainbow. We couldn't get high enough in the air to get a clear view of the entire sky, but the rainbow was nowhere to be seen. If it had disappeared, we reasoned, no doubt the pot of gold had as well. We started to climb down, two very disappointed kids, when suddenly Nino stopped and signaled for me to be quiet. I silently made a face and a gesture to ask him why we needed to stop. I thought maybe it was my mother angry at me for going into the woods without permission. Nino pointed downward, and I followed along with my eyes to where he was pointing. There, down on the ground, was the strangest looking animal I had ever seen, or have ever seen even to this day. It was covered in dark brown fur, like a bear, but this was much more like a man in shape. It had a long, snouted dog face, though not the face of a bear or a man or anything else but a dog. It was very fit and muscular, and it walked along in a way like it was sneaking or prowling. It looked left and right as though scanning the area for something to chase and capture. Maybe it had heard us, and possibly it was the two of us that he intended to find. I was sweating so hard, I was afraid I would drip on the monster down below. I was also afraid I would lose my grip and fall off the branch I was clinging to. There was an updraft from below on that afternoon. I could feel it lifting my t-shirt a little from time to time. That is my guess as to why the dogman didn't smell the two creatures emitting flop sweat that were only 15 or 20 feet above him. This creature had claws like Wolverine from the movies, only in miniature. He could definitely have climbed up that tree trunk in seconds, and we would have been sliced and diced in under a minute. There was nothing to do but breathe as quietly as we could, and try not to panic. I saw the dogman or werewolf or whatever it was walk in the direction of my home, and I observed it from the back for quite a while as it moved away from us. Great. If the dogman was walking toward my home, that meant I couldn't do the same. I couldn't risk walking in the same direction that the creature was heading. I wasn't sure what we were going to do, and I wanted to cry for my mother so badly. Childhood ended for me on that afternoon because I needed to deal with this situation on my own, with only the help of another kid my age. There was no adult who could help me. I had to stay calm and be the adult myself. I thought about what we might find if we ran away from my house and the dogman, but I really couldn't remember what was even in that direction. As it turns out, it's 2.5 miles from there to a 2-lane blacktop highway, so it's lucky that we didn't try to follow that plan. I was out of ideas and ready to give up when the foliage in the direction of my parents' house rustled, and out walked the dogman, its pointed ears bent back, and with an annoyed look on its hideous face. It stopped and let out a long, mournful howl, so loud it almost caused me to lose my grip. His head was turned skyward, and I was deathly afraid he would see the two of us there, above him. He did not, and when he was finished, I could hear howls coming from every direction around us, very far away. It was some serious quadraphonic sound, but the dogman ignored the replies he was receiving, and he marched past the tree beneath us and disappeared in the direction he had initially come from. I counted to 120 in my head, and then whispered, "Now!" to Nino. We both skidded down the tree and leaped down the rest of the way. I remember running home so hard that I got a cramp in my side in the process. When we got to my backyard, we were too scared to be outside any longer, so we ran inside, and I collapsed around my mother, giving her a big hug. She was like, "Quiet, honey, Mommy is watching her stories," but I kept hugging her anyway. Nino asked for some cookies, and she told us we could each have cookies if we let her watch her soap opera in peace. We didn't have a VCR back then, although I do know that the Betamax was on the market. If Mom missed her stories, she couldn't rewind or watch a recording of it. We didn't have any soap opera magazines that she could check to find out what happened, and none of her friends liked this show. In fact, only my father's mother liked to watch that show, so she would have been forced to ask her mother-in-law for a favor if she missed the plot developments. I knew the drill, so we got our cookies and ran up to my room to talk over what had just happened. We both swore to each other never to tell any adults that we had found Dogman at the end of the rainbow. The St. Patrick's Day Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, Happy St. Patrick's Day to Bigfoot and Henry and Willie and Dr. Death and Madeline Starr and whichever else of you are Irish for today. I've got a story about the Dogman in upstate New York that took place 1 year ago today on St. Patrick's Day. There is a certain bar up north of the city that legend has it leprechauns appear at once in a while. Actually, There may be a few of those, but I mean this one in particular that's just off the highway and down the road in the woods by a stream. If you aren't from the Northeast, you might be surprised by how much of New York State is lovely and natural. Let's be honest, you'd be surprised that any of it is, but it's actually still a lovely state, no matter what the politicians try to do to it. And there are a lot of great people still left here, or at least there still were a year ago this time, and these are all the reasons why I headed out to this particular bar on St. Patrick's Day 2020, only to find it closed down by the government. I thought the Constitution didn't allow the government to prohibit freedom of assembly, and on the holiest day of the year to an Irishman, no less. I was stunned, and even after a full year of gaslighting, I remain stunned. So, I did the only thing any red-blooded man would do in such a situation. I went and bought a six-pack. Then I went to sit behind the bar and watch the stream go by. To be honest, I felt a weird chill as I sat down back there, almost like I was strangely frightened. I was so completely alone, and that was the place where certain individuals have said they had conversations with the good people. You know, the good people. The idea of that frightened me. I didn't then, and I don't now, ever want to be exposed to those wonderful people. I wish them well, I do, and I think quite highly of them, but mostly I try not to think of them at all. Nothing good can come from a mortal encountering the likes of them. You might end up like Rip Van Winkle, or you might not ever come back at all. The combination of trying not to think about the leprechauns and the sound of the water rushing by combined to have me needing to go relieve myself before I had finished half a bottle. I got up to walk back to the bar and use the restroom, then remembered that it was closed. Closed. On St. Patrick's Day. Sure, the devil has taken control of our planet, he has. And on such a holy day, too. Thinking about the injustice and religious persecution in all of it got me angry and made me forget to be scared of the good people. I started wandering a bit into where the trees are more densely packed, and I looked for a good trunk to aim at. I finished what I had to do, but in the midst of the process, I noticed a wee green plant down below being watered by me from above. I couldn't take my eyes off of that little thing, and as soon as I finished my business, I bent down to inspect it more closely. It was a 4-leaf clover, and I had urinated all over it. That right there is sort of my life expressed in real-time poetry. It sums up everything for me, from birth till now. I had always wanted to have a 4-leaf clover to press between 2 pages of a small Bible and carry with me at all times for good luck. I had read a story when I was 12 or 13 about someone who did that with their 4-leaf clover, and so this had been a bucket list item in my life. Bending down, my nose a few inches away from the living symbol of good luck that I had literally taken a whiz all over, I moved my head to the side to see how far I was from the stream. Maybe I could pluck it and then wash it in the stream. Or maybe if I could find a bucket or something to carry water in, I could fill it and then wash the clover off before pulling it out of the ground. If I could remember where it was and find my way back to it, that is. While I was doing all this deep thinking with my nose on the ground and my butt in the air, I heard a sound just like a motorcycle that's maybe a block away. I thought that's what it was at first, but the sound was definitely coming from closer than that, which meant it was a quieter sound coming from right behind me. Realizing it was an animal growling, I stood up and spun around. That made me lose my balance, and I fell backward, the trunk of the tree catching my fall. There, about 20 feet away, was a large and strange-looking dog. It was standing on all fours, but the 2 front legs bent out to the sides, almost like an iguana's legs, or sort of like how a man's arms would bend sideways. if he were crawling on all fours like that. But those weren't human arms. They were far too long. The head looked like a wolf in many ways, but a wolf that had seen great battles. This was not a young animal, but it was more alive and vital than any living thing I'd ever come face to face with in this manner. I was as afraid as if I were seeing a lion or a tiger or a bear. Oh my, indeed. The head really seemed to be as large as a bear's head, but it was longer and more canine. The animal was actually making itself smaller, hugging closer to the ground, but I did not interpret that as it submitting to me. No, the growling and the bared teeth told me that this was something that was thinking of leaping up on me and taking me down. I sized it up, and it had to be my size or even bigger. I wasn't sure what to do. If I backed up even slowly, I might be sending a signal of weakness. On the other hand, if I acted aggressive, I wasn't going to be able to back up my bluff against that thing. When I didn't make my choice, that opened up the chance for the dogman to do it instead. And what he decided to do was to stand up on his hind legs and kind of make this angry sound that sounded kind of like, Panicking, I took a step backward without looking, and I tripped over my bottles. One of them rolled out, striking a rock and popping open. It rolled down the incline toward the dogman, bubbling and spouting foamy beer as it rolled. I thought that was the end for me. I thought that the beast would be alarmed or take this as me threatening it in some way. I cowered behind a tree, huddled down, trying to make myself as small as possible, and shaking all over. I expected the worst, and I was in no way emotionally prepared to go. I cried as I thought about all the people I would never get to say goodbye to. I cried about all the people I should have treated better. And then my pity party got interrupted by a strange but familiar sound. It took me a few seconds to place it, but eventually I recognized the sound of a dog lapping up water. Or, well, lapping up a liquid of one sort or another. Getting to my knees and peeking around the tree trunk, I saw something you don't see every day. No, I didn't see a leprechaun, not at all. I saw the dogman back down on all fours, licking up the puddle left by what came out of my bottle. When he was done, he looked up toward me, getting angry all over again. I quickly opened 2 more of the bottles and rolled them his way. And then, when he was occupied again, I quietly got back to the road and hopped in my car to make a quick getaway. People ask me why I didn't take a picture before I left, but I look at them like they're crazy. I wasn't looking at an animal in a zoo. I was looking at something that could take me down and finish me off without even exerting itself, and it was within range to do exactly that. I had no survival training and I had no weapons, so I wasn't thinking that I would be alive later on to share the photo on social media or whatever. Sometimes people say that I could have taken the picture while it drank the beer, but have you ever tried to open the camera app on my phone? It takes like 25 seconds. I'm sorry, but I wasn't thinking that this is a Kodak moment. I was thinking that if I got to my car fast enough, I might live past the next 2 minutes. I have to say, that was the worst St. Patrick's Day of all time, and I hope it's never that bad ever again. To me, it's fitting that on such a horrible holiday, I should be the one to see with my own bloodshot eyes the St. Patrick's Day Dogman. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you. I've got my special green hat on to bring me the luck of the Irish, which I happily share with all of you. We've got 2 more Dogman stories coming up in a second, but first please allow me to thank today's executive producer, Jorge Martinez. Have you all looked and seen us? Executive producer Jorge Martinez. With Jorge, we do forge, unless it's pronounced George. Please join me in thanking Jorge or George Martinez for making this episode possible. In exchange, we send him links to our weekly Sunday night secret uncensored stories, far too wild to ever run on this channel, and you can see them too. Just do what Mr. Martinez did and join the PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or click the join link under this or any of our videos. And now, on to our second of 3 Dogman stories, and we call this one, My Horse Scared Off a Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I live on a family farm in Pennsylvania that lost a lot of livestock during 2020. My family doesn't believe me, but I think the problem is over now because my horse scared off a dogman. What I mean when I say dogman is a big dude, taller than I am, and I'm 6'4". He was mostly covered in gray fur like a wolf, but it was missing in patches, and the skin underneath was this other shade of gray that was lighter than most of the fur, but darker than the fur on his chest and belly. It kind of reminded me of the big bad wolf from the cartoons in that it stood tall and thin like a man. It was lighter colored, like I said, and it didn't wear clothes or gloves, obviously, but still, it reminded me of a nightmare version of a cartoon. Like Wile E. Coyote starring in a movie directed by Rob Zombie, he looked nasty and feral and deadly, and like he'd already been in more violent scuffles than anyone had a right to survive. I was the only one to see it, besides the mare and all of the animals it must have taken. Nobody in my family, except possibly my 2 younger siblings, believed my story of what I saw. I can't understand why they don't, but they just don't. I'll tell it to you, and by now I don't even care if you believe me or not. I expect you won't, but I'll go through it one more time anyway. Before I describe my actual sighting, I should preface it by saying that we started missing chickens back around last spring. I think it was 1 chicken at first, then a few weeks later a second one, then 3 disappeared in one night. It had to be a human, my father decided, because the coop was always locked up securely when we found it. There was no sign that anyone had broken in, and yet we would be missing birds. Clearly, that could not have been done by an animal. Not a normal animal, anyway. By the summer, we had also lost a young goat, just up and disappeared. In the autumn, I was walking out to the stables one morning just as dawn was breaking. I was thinking how beautiful and peaceful it was at that moment, and then I heard crazy noises coming from the stables. By the time I got to the stable door, something large was running on out. I had to dive out of the way, as the aforementioned Mr. Wile E. Coyote was about to run me over like a roadrunner. As I was rising to my feet, I saw one of the mares running out of the stable looking angrier than I've ever seen a horse look in my entire life. I watched as that dog stood on its hind legs, and the horse rose up on her hind legs too. Now both animals had their arms free to use as weapons, and I dove behind some barrels for protection. As I peeked out to watch what was happening, I could see that although that mangy coyote man had his front arms in a sort of praying position the way dogs do, that dog's paws were not the same as ordinary dogs' paws. To tell the truth, he looked like an evil old creepy man from a black and white silent movie. Everything about him looked and felt evil. I saw him try to scratch up my poor mare, but she was too fast for him. The horse kept dropping to all fours, then rising up and swinging her front hooves at the noggin of that gross-looking monster dogman. But this was a pitcher's duel, as neither of them was able to connect on the other. I'd like to say that I ran out of hiding and bravely scared the dogman off, but the truth is I stayed hiding like a chicken until the dogman just hit the wall. He just seemed to suddenly realize that this battle was not worth the effort, and he sort of skulked away like a villain from an old-school vaudeville show. I had the urge to throw rotten fruit at him and boo and hiss. My family says I made up this entire story, which is quite insulting. I asked them why the animal disappearances stopped after the mayor frightened off the dogman, and they told me I was nuts. According to them, the chicken thief was one person, the one who stole the goat was someone else, and that they were isolated incidents. As for the mayor getting out, they don't even believe that part of the story. But I know it happened, just as I know that the animal disappearances are over for good as well. And I know all this because my horse scared off a dogman. I saw a dogman while talking about werewolves. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story about a dogman for you that is also a story about synchronicities, if you're into that kind of stuff. I was walking through the woods of Coventry Farm Park, one of a number of breathtaking natural areas in and around Princeton, New Jersey. I really loved living in that town while I had the chance. It's not only beautiful, but there's such a history of great minds being there. You can walk past the house that Albert Einstein used to live at. You can imagine him still sitting there on the porch waving at you. Princeton is a place where one can feel at one with both the natural world and the intellectual one as well. In spite of all this, on the day I'm talking about, I was on the phone with my friend arguing about an old 60s sitcom that had a werewolf in it. My friend was telling me that there used to be a show about a normal dude with a day job who was also a werewolf, and his hot blonde wife kept trying to make sure he keeps the whole monster thing covered up. I guess she liked living in the suburbs or whatever. Now I, on the other hand, was trying to explain to my buddy that he was thinking about that episode of Bewitched, the one where Durwood gets turned into a werewolf by someone, I forget who. Probably Agnes Moorehead. He agreed that it might have been Elizabeth Montgomery playing the wife, but insisted that this was not Bewitched. I asked him how Elizabeth Montgomery could have starred on 2 different TV shows at the same time, and he said, Gomer Pyle did it, which is entirely untrue. My buddy described this one scene of the day job guy getting hair on his face, turning into the werewolf, and arguing with his wife, but that scene is literally in the Bewitched episode I'm talking about. I'm 100% certain I'm correct about this, but my friend was being stubborn. And as we bickered on the cell, I looked up, and I saw the single most remarkable thing I'll ever see. There was a ginormous black dog with glowing eyeshine, standing up on its hind legs leaning on a tree trunk, looking into a nest on a tree branch. I don't know what he was seeing, but he seemed chill about it. He just looked in there and panted the way dogs do. This fellow was so big that I felt intimidated, and when I didn't see any leash on him, I ducked behind a tree hoping he wouldn't see me. I've got a fear of large dogs, and this one looked bigger than a St. Bernard. It didn't look like a St. Bernard, more like a German Shepherd with extremely dark fur. It also had much larger teeth than I'd ever seen in a canine mouth, and that didn't make me feel any better at all. I decided I'd just wait until the oversized monster dog was done with his business and trotted away. But then came the moment that twisted my brain up inside my head. The dog never dropped down to all fours. The big canine just walked away, looking like a tourist enjoying the woods. He was gone like a snap, and I got back on my phone where my friend was still going on about nonsense. I interrupted to tell him that I just saw a freaking dog man. He asked me if I got a photo of it, which of course I didn't. I I didn't even know it was a dogman at first. It was leaning on that tree to support itself while it looked in the nest. Any dog can do that. You don't have to be a dogman. It was only as he walked away that I realized what he was. And that took all of 3 or 4 seconds. So my buddy never believed that this really happened, but it actually did. And I think that it was the world's way of saying that I was right, and my friend was wrong. I remember recording Bewitched every day for months until I found the right episode, and then I remember forcing him to watch it, but he still wouldn't admit that I was right. Clearly, though, I was right. VHS doesn't lie. It was definitely Bewitched he was thinking about, and I got synchronistic confirmation from the universe because I saw a dogman while talking about werewolves. Thanks for watching. Wisconsin werewolf sighting and synchronicity. Back in the late 1990s, when I was still a kid, my family were driving through Michigan and Wisconsin for my father's business. He originally was going to make the trip himself, as he had all through my and my brother's childhoods, but we all wanted to go with him this time. We talked him into camping out along the way instead of using hotels, so it would actually be cheaper than if he went alone. Mom offered to handle cooking, and my brother and I offered to not be too large a nuisance. So, off we went. Of course, my brother, who we can call Tom, and I were largely interested in going on the trip because we were fascinated with the Beast of Bray Road, which we had read about in 14 times, I guess. We were aware of the Michigan Dogman as well, so we were very hyped up about the possibility of sighting an actual werewolf. We really had no concept that doing something like camping out in a dogman area might be dangerous. We didn't think animals would bother humans. We thought life was like watching TV. But when we did run into a dogman, he taught us a very different way of looking at things. So anyway, the entire trip, nothing at all interesting happened. When we reached our furthest point and we were about to begin the drive back, Tom and I were kind of down about the whole thing, and our parents were sick of camping out. They said we would sleep at a hotel on the way back, which had far fewer stops and was going to be a shorter trip anyway. But, being kids, we just got involved in talking about other things, and we had soon almost forgotten about the dogman entirely. Then, the strangest thing happened. My father got off the highway and onto a local road. I think it was Plank Road. This was either in or near Elkhorn, Wisconsin. My mother was confused and concerned, wanting to know why we were on this country road, going through some kind of a farm. It was wheat or corn or something growing there on both sides. It felt like children of the corn were going to jump out at us and say boo. Even though it was the middle of the day and quite sunny, I was getting as freaked out as my mother was. Finally, we reached the end of the block and made a turn. I looked up at the street sign, and I was amazed to read that we were about to enter Bray Road. I gasped. My mother asked what was wrong. I told her, "We're on Bray Road." She said, "So what?" I informed her in a frantic fashion that this was the home of the Beast of Bray Road. Of course she asked, "What's a Beast of Bray Road?" And as I was about to answer, telling her it was a werewolf, I heard the word werewolf come out of my brother Tom's mouth. Well, he wasn't just saying it. He was screaming it. Passionately. I looked and saw he was pointing at something outside the window. By the time I had turned in his direction, he had moved from pointing out his side window to pointing out the back window. I looked out there just in time to see something larger than a man walk off in the road and disappear in the farm. It was a large, hairy animal that walked like a man, but had a tail like a dog or maybe a cat. It must have crossed behind the car from the driver's side over past the passenger side and then disappeared. Neither of our parents saw it, but both Tom and I saw it. I couldn't believe it appeared just as I was about to say the word werewolf. The episode was pretty shocking, but it only annoyed my mother, who then went on to lecture all of us about how hard her life was, having to be on this road trip. She seemed to have forgotten that the rest of us were on that same road trip, and she was describing our fun time as torture. It kind of put us all in a bad mood. Dad explained that he had taken the detour down to Bray Road as a special treat for me and Tom. Since we hadn't gotten to see a dogman along the way, he wanted us to at least get to see the location of one of the famous sightings. The more he explained this to Mom, the more confused and annoyed she got that he would encourage our belief in monsters. Soon, she had ruined the evening with all her rules about what we're allowed to think or feel. We got a hotel room, and Mom ordered lights out almost as soon as we had gotten there. None of us 3 guys could sleep, though, so we all got dressed again and decided to go for a stroll outside the hotel in the night. We were only about a mile from Bray Road, I think, or at least close enough that we could imagine we were in Dogman territory as we enjoyed the starry night. It was a real moment of bonding for me, Tom, and Dad as we comforted each other and restored each other's self-esteem. Soon, we were daring each other to cross the highway in front of the hotel and walk into the woods across the way. Dad kept telling us Dogman lived over there. I wondered if he would have really let us cross the highway in the middle of the night looking for werewolves. If Mom caught us, she would have killed all 3. So, anyway, Dad was daring us and we were daring him right back, when suddenly we heard a sound from across the highway, like the sound of branches breaking under a heavy weight. Looking across there, I swear to you, we basically saw the exact same thing we had seen before. The hairy, tall man with the tail that crossed Bray Road behind us. This seemed to be the same kind of creature. For all I knew, it was the exact same one we had seen earlier. I screamed like an idiot. I was a kid, but that was a dumb thing even for a kid to do. Tom had his hand over my mouth trying to shut me up, but that animal man was now looking me right in my eyes. It was not at all what I expected a dogman to look like. This thing was not some magnificent marvel of nature. It was not a terrifying but noble carnivore like a bear. It was more like something designed to do evil, like something that had crawled out of hell itself and existed only to leave things worse than it had found them. I only looked at that creature for a second before squirming and fighting to escape Tom and to run back to the hotel at my top kid speed. I did note that the creature's breath was turning to smoke in front of its mouth, but this was an almost 70-degree night. So I ran to the hotel, and after I was inside, only then did I look behind me. I saw my brother running toward me, followed by my father. I looked around for the werewolf, and I saw him first by the whiffs of white smoke he was emitting as he panted on the edge of the hotel's property line. He was staring at us, but no longer following. It was as though the beast knew about trespassing law. I watched the wolf-headed hairy man thing, and I saw that its eyes seemed kind of orange or yellow, but I couldn't be certain that wasn't caused by the reflection of the streetlights. I hadn't noticed it the first time I saw the creature, so maybe it was just due to where he was standing. At any rate, when Tom and Dad got back inside, we all watched through the glass doors as the animal, or man, or whatever it was, walked off back across the highway and into the forest out of our sight. We still couldn't sleep, so we sat up talking in the hotel lobby until we were formally asked to please return to our rooms or to our car, since we were annoying people. Out in the night lurked the dogman, but up in our room lurked our angry mom. So we did what anyone would do. We went out and slept in the car. Or I should say Dad slept while Tom and I stayed up till dawn, looking around for werewolves in the night. Mom yelled at us in the morning, but, she would have yelled at us no matter what we did. After all, her life was so hard, having to be on a road trip with her family. Poor Dad had to cope with it, while Tom and I crashed out and slept the whole rest of the way home. And that's the story of the one, or really 2 times my family and I saw the Wisconsin werewolf. Don't go anywhere, we're just getting started. We've got 2 more Dogman stories to tell you, but first, big thanks to our EP Christina. She helps make us Lena and Mina. She's Christina Gonzalez. More fun than a barrel of koalas. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Christina Gonzalez, for making this episode possible. We share our secret, uncensored, scary stories with her as a way of saying thanks, including our over 15 hours of archived uncensored stories available nowhere else. You too can become a Scary Stories executive producer by joining our PayPal subscribers club or by clicking the join link under this or any of our videos and becoming a channel member. And now, on to our second of 3 Dogman stories for today. And we call this one The Werewolf Curse at My High School. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this happened almost a decade ago. I've lost touch with everyone in the story, but they were my friends at the time, and they were among the most popular kids in our school and our town. My family had moved in while we were all in junior year, so I was at the time grateful to have any friends at all in my new school. To have such popular kids accepting me put me in a positive state of mind and gave me some emotional space to adjust and get my schoolwork done. I guess it was because of my self-absorption that I didn't at first notice the darker side of the lives of my popular new friends. One day there was a commotion in the schoolyard outside during our lunch period. Someone just past the fence was shouting things in our direction. My friends looked like they were all gonna faint, and they ran inside. Before joining them, I stood there for a while trying to see what or who they were so frightened of. It just looked like a girl to me. A goth girl our age. She sure seemed angry, but I couldn't really understand anything she was shouting about. So, when I got back inside, I got the entire history from the others. They just spilled out the story for me. I think it made them calm down a bit to talk about it. I was pretty much the only person in the school who wouldn't already know all of this history, because I was one of the only people from out of town. That goth girl outside, let's call her Wednesday, used to actually be a member of this group or clique that I was now a part of. This was back in middle school before she went goth. But freshman year in high school, her parents split up, and she went all goth and emo, started reading about spellcraft, and adopted a sour attitude. Rather than looking out for their friend, the group kicked her out. And that's when things really went dark. Supposedly, the girl put a curse on them that they would each turn into werewolves, 1 per year, until they were all of them cursed forever. And if they had children, each succeeding generation would be just as cursed as they were. At this point, I burst out laughing in the lunchroom. It was like the whole place went silent. I felt like everyone was looking at me. Nobody else thought that there was anything funny about this story. You can't believe every goth girl that says she's putting a curse on you guys, I suggested to them. I was told to shut up, because there was more to this story. Back then, there was a kid named Cliff in the group. A few days after they had all gotten cursed, he came in one morning in really bad shape. His hair was messed up, and he looked as though he had been crying. When he was asked what was wrong, he said that both his pets had passed away the night before, but he did not want to talk about it. He was clearly in grief, and possibly in shock, so everyone tried to give him some space that day. Then, the next day, when he didn't come in at all, nobody was really very surprised. After a few days, they noticed that all his social media accounts were closed, as well as those of his family members, the ones we knew at least. Their phones were turned off. Their house was empty. This happened really fast, and nobody ever found out what happened to him. So, life went on, and although it was weird what happened or didn't happen to Cliff, Things sort of returned to normal by sophomore year. That is, until Mary Ann had her episode. It was supposedly in girls' gym class. One of the other girls made fun of Mary Ann for having hairy legs. Mary Ann thought she had shaved that morning, so she was shocked to find out that she actually did have hairy legs. Other girls joined in the taunting, and apparently Mary Ann had a bit of a freak out. One of the kids described it as her Hulk out. Apparently, she started screaming things at the girls with such passion that it devolved into animal-like noises and something like a howl. This kid Bill told me he saw the tail end of a bunch of girls screaming and running out of the gym in their shorts. It was quite memorable, he told me with a grin. He didn't see Mary Ann, but the other girls were crying and saying she had turned into a monster right in front of them. So the next thing you know, Mary Ann's family also moved out of town, and by this point, nobody was laughing at the goth girl's curse any longer. Her family moved out of town too, and junior year had been going in a sort of normal and boring way, so people were hoping that the worst was over. None of the kids had freaked out or hulked out, and no families had mysteriously moved out of town overnight either. The horror was starting to recede into the past like a bad dream, until that day when Wednesday the goth girl came back to town. Now they each wondered who would be targeted next. I had an idea, and I presented it to them. Why not invite Wednesday back into the group? If she lived in another town, then she wouldn't actually be around all that often, so what would be the difference? And it might heal her hurt feelings. Well, it wasn't like they thought my idea was crazy. It was more like they acted as though I had never even said it. They just went back to talking about how afraid they were. Nobody was looking for a way out. So anyway, that kid Bill used to live a couple blocks away from me, so we would walk home after school together. On that day, we took a shortcut near a patch of woods because he wanted to get home as quickly as possible. I didn't blame the guy, but at the same time, I tried to give him a pep talk and continued to lobby for my idea of giving the goth girl a second chance in the group. It was like I wasn't saying anything, though. He was so lost in his misery and worry and fear. So, as we passed by the woods, Bill's whole body sort of caught, and he got all tight, and then he jerked around into several weird positions. He was clearly in some kind of pain, but I couldn't understand what was happening to him. I took a few steps back to get a better view, and also so that I didn't accidentally get hit by his arms and head, which was sort of flailing about. The dude was growing hair all over his body, just like in the story of Mary Ann in the gym, except this, I was watching with my own eyes. I backed up, and as I did so, I saw figures moving through the woods past my contorting friend. Dark figures emerged. They looked like werewolves from the movies. They appeared to be animals, as they were entirely covered in fur or hair, and did not wear clothes like people. They walked upright like humans, though. They had the long ears and the long snout and dark eyes, which I could not make out at all. They seemed to be focused on Bill, watching him transform. I understood then that he was going to end up looking the same as the others. That's when I literally backed up into someone standing behind me, and I screamed and jumped in the air. When I turned around, it was that goth girl. She was standing right there. I didn't know what to do, but before I could even catch my breath, she looked at me, pointed away, and said one word. Go. I babbled like a fool, telling her that she could hang with me if she wanted, and that I had asked the others to let her back in the group, but she interrupted me and once more said that one word. Go. So, I went. And I didn't hang with those kids anymore. Nobody faulted me for it, not even them. They were cursed. They knew it. The school knew it. And now, I knew it too. Within 4 years, all of their families were living elsewhere, and nobody really knew where elsewhere. Those things looked like what we call the Dogman, but I believe I was looking at werewolves. Were they always in that form? Or did they turn back and forth like in the movies? Did they always travel with that goth girl? Did she control them somehow? I have a lot of questions, but I've never had any inclination to pursue finding the answers. I figure the less I know, the safer I and my loved ones will be. It's just not worth knowing. Let them keep their secrets. And another life lesson I learned that year was this. Always, and I mean always, be nice to goth girls. You never know which one of them might actually know how to put a real curse on you. Dogman. On a park bench. Years ago, when I was in high school, my family lived for a few years in Yonkers, which is an area north of New York City. There's a park there called the Lenoir Preserve. It doesn't look like much on a map, but it's actually 40 acres. And the first time I went there, I got lost for a while. But after a number of visits, I felt quite at home in the preserve. Maybe too at home. One afternoon, I was doing my schoolwork on some benches they have in the middle of the preserve. I was alone on that day, and the homework made my brain feel tired. So I laid down and took a nap on the benches. When I woke up, I was alarmed to find that it was already nighttime, and the sky was quite dark. This was years before I had a cell phone, so I had no idea what time it was, and I had nothing I could use for a flashlight in my pocket. I figured my parents must be panicked, and in my mind, I started going over which paths out might be best lit in the middle of the night. None of them would be, I realized. Sitting up and looking around me, getting used to the darkness, I suddenly noticed the sound. At first I thought it was growling, and I gasped. But then I understood I was listening to snoring of some kind. I looked and saw that on the opposite end of these benches, which are built in a curved C shape, was a figure sleeping there. I guess he saw me sleeping on this end, and he went and slept on that end. I assumed he must be a homeless person. I checked my pockets to see if I still had my money and stuff. Then I checked my school books, and everything was still there. So I guess that guy didn't mean me any harm, and that was a relief. After a while of getting up my courage, I stood and chose a direction to walk, and resolved to get us home as fast as I could, no matter what was about to happen. I was sort of getting myself into the head state that I was going to have to be brave now, and that was that. That is that, I said out loud to myself, but I must have said it too loud, because the figure on the bench stirred. I started walking away, not wanting any conflict with the guy, whoever he was. Looking back over my shoulder, I saw him sitting up. The way the moonlight caught him, it seemed as though he were wearing some sort of Halloween mask. Well, that couldn't be a good thing. I should have run right then, and I swear I don't know why I didn't. Instead, I stood there staring into the darkness, trying to understand what kind of a mask that guy was wearing. I guess he didn't like being stared at, because the next thing I knew, he was standing up, and his body language was quite agitated. He was larger than I had expected, and his clothes seemed torn all over. Then, he did something so unexpected that I literally fell backward onto my butt in shock. He bent down, and he howled. Yes, howled, like a wolf. And when he did so, I could see that his clothes weren't torn at all. They were just not clothes in the first place. They were hair or fur. This wasn't a homeless man. This wasn't even a man at all. This was some kind of animal that stood like a man, but howled like a wolf. He took one step in my direction, and I flew into the forest, trying to stay on path, but running into a couple of trees instead in the darkness. I was reeling, and my head was spinning. Plus, I could hear the monster thing behind me, pursuing me. I wish I could remember more detail about the next part, because I'm sure it would have been the scariest part of this story. But I was in utter panic, and I only have vague memories of being in fight or flight mode. I remember bruising myself on branches and trees, and I remember falling one time, but mainly I just remember the abject fear, the utter fear. I remember feeling certain I was about to die in a really painful manner, and I remember blubbering and crying the entire way like a pathetic infant. I could hear the monster behind me, or at least I heard sounds behind me, and every sound was the monster man, at least in my mind. And so when I got to a lit area by the entrance of the preserve, I started laughing in relief. I felt as though I would be safe now, and that the creature would not continue its pursuit. I couldn't have been more wrong. Turning around for the first time, I saw the creature in its entirety, and in enough light to make out most of the relevant details. This was a werewolf. I don't remember what year it was, but it had to have happened after that movie The Howling came out, because that's what I saw. That's what it looked exactly like. And it was over 6 feet tall, even leaving the tall ears out. It might have been 7 feet, but it was a wide and muscular 7 feet. I was stunned. Again, I should have run, but I studied him, trying to understand how that could be a costume. A monster from the movies doesn't just come to life on a park bench. There had to be some logical explanation for it. Once again, this creature was being stared at by me, and once again, it didn't like that. It didn't howl at me this time, though. It growled, and it bared its teeth. Can masks bare their teeth? I mean, it curled its lips back and revealed a monster set of chompers. This sure looked like a real werewolf, and not like a guy in a costume. But I didn't stop and ask him for a DNA sample to send to 23andMe, so I'll never be certain. But I've thought about what I saw that night many times since. Sometimes I even dream about it. Each time I'm once again trying to find some evidence so that I can call this a man in a costume. And every time, it ends the same way. The creature bounds off the little hill he was standing on and starts running after me on all fours. That, to me, is the closest to definitive proof that I've got that this was not a human. Men and women don't just drop to all fours to chase you. This creature did, though. So I ran down Dudley Street toward North Broadway, screaming the entire way, practically feeling the hot breath of the monster behind me. I don't think I was ever so scared in my life, and I don't think I ever ran so hard either. Once I reached North Broadway, I continued running the entire rest of the way home. I have no idea how far the monster pursued me, but I know I was a wreck when I got there. None of my family seemed to even care. It was only 8 at night or 9, so they thought I'd gone out to dinner with friends or something. I walked in, panting, frantic, and out of breath, but they didn't even look up from the TV set. Here I thought they would have been worried about me. I never told any of them about the werewolf or whatever that was. I told one girlfriend a year or 2 later, but she laughed at me. So I've hardly ever told the story to anyone else since then. I stopped going to that park, and I never saw anything strange ever again. I'm torn as to what I actually saw, as there's really no hard evidence in one direction or another. Was it some kind of animal that looks and sounds like a wolf but walks on its hind legs? Or was it a werewolf? Meaning, was that a man who somehow transformed into a wolf? As ridiculous as that might sound, I'm not sure it's any less ridiculous than the idea of a predator that large living in that 40-acre woodland so close to a large suburban settlement. I mean, Yonkers is a pretty big place, you know. A lot of people live there. If a monster lived in the woods there, wouldn't it be more famous by now? That's why in my gut, I kind of feel that the thing I saw was not in that form all the time. Maybe it lived as a man by day and a wolf by night. Maybe it's like in the movies and he only transforms sometimes into the beast. It might explain the lack of reports of the creature. Then again, maybe I'm the only one to talk about seeing that thing, because maybe I'm the only one who got away.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it. You can become a channel member by clicking the join link below. Then you can check our community page to find the links to 10 hours or more of secret, uncensored Dogman stories too wild to be told on this channel. Your other option is to join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's Peter's homemade club, where he will personally email you the links as well as occasional secret club messages. You may also be included as an executive producer in a future episode. You have a scary experience you want to tell us about? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com, or else call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LESS-SCARY. The machine cuts off every few minutes, so if you have a long story, please keep calling back and we'll piece it together later on. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.